It's the Boristurk podcast, the most consistent podcast in the basketball community. I wanted to make a joke about how we're sponsored by Biktarvy now. Biktarvy is like my favorite new drug name they came up with, but I think they'll sue the shit out of us. And then my second sad thought was they're never going to hear this. So the goal now with the pod is to grow it so big that Biktarvy sues us. It is great to be back. I'm with Max. We'll get to him in a second, but today we are here to talk about the things we've sort of had in pencil for a few weeks, but we are ready to put in pen. Things that are real, things that, however many games, about 30 games into this regular season, we're ready to say we think are legit. Max, you're here. How are you?
I'm good. I've come equipped with five things that I think are officially happening this season and ready to dive in. So, yeah, happy to get started.
Max is coming off back-to-back skiing weeks. The surgically repaired knee is holding up. Oh my God, the Ole Miss Rebels are up 10 in Tuscaloosa right now. So you know what? Right now, we are grateful. Give me your first thing, the number one thing that you think you're ready to call real in this NBA season.
The Oklahoma City Thunder are making the finals, and I'm picking them to win the title. This is a take that they're who I picked to win before the season, and everything I've seen thus far in the season has only reinforced that take. They currently have the second best net rating in NBA history, behind only the '96 Bulls. Assuming that holds up over the course of the season, every team around them in net rating ranks in NBA history has won the championship that year. You have to go down to like the seventh or eighth team in net rating before you get to one that didn't win the title. And still, most of the top teams in net rating win the championship. They have the best defensive rating since the 2020 Milwaukee Bucks, so best defensive rating in the last 5 years. And they're doing all of it without Chet Holmgren, who's maybe their most impactful defensive player, and a multi-tool offensive player who's significantly going to raise their ceiling on both ends of the court. They're almost 4 points per 100 possessions better than second place on defense. The gap between first and second is about the same as the gap between fifth and 19th. And yeah, this is just the most dominant team I've seen. They're completely running away from the rest of the West, which is a very competitive conference. And whenever they lose, it feels like a shock, even without Chet, who's either their second or third best player. So that's just got to be the story of the season so far to me. Them and Cleveland as well, to a lesser extent, but I think there's more competition at the top of the East. Oklahoma City, I think, has a very clear path towards winning the West, and I think they're the best team in the NBA.
I'm with you that they're in their own tier. And I've been saying this, like, I really don't envy OKC's front office preparing for the trade deadline in about a month. I don't know how you get better without trading Aaron Wiggins' elite role player contract and or damaging the special chemistry that they've built to this point. Isaiah Joe, who just went nuts at MSG, I guess is one of the contracts that would need to be cobbled together to like get a better player, like someone who could really close for them. You know, the Cam Johnson types we've been hearing about in the rumor mill now for weeks. But it's a really tough call for OKC because they have infinite draft picks and trade capital, but they've got a really special thing going. And everyone they have right now who plays significant minutes is a really good fit for the system that Dag has built. I say Dagnall. I forget that's kind of what we call him. But yeah, so crazy time for the front office just figuring out if they want to add, stay put, because it's tough staying put with a team that's so clearly an inner circle contender that has so much it could theoretically do in the trade market. There's an argument to go get like a little bit more facilitation, like another straw to stir the drink. I tweeted that a guy like prime Kyle Anderson would be really interesting to toss in the mix here. But I also said that after a couple of games, they didn't have Alex Caruso, who does a lot of that stirring of the drink. And Chet Holmgren obviously facilitates and creates offense and keeps the music going in ways that Alex Caruso could only dream of. So I don't know, man. It's going to be a really interesting deadline for OKC. And I'll just say, like, I don't blame them if they stay put, even with everything they have to offer to other teams. So on the negative side with OKC, I would say enough of these Atlanta Hawks looking jerseys, like just get them out. What game was, I think it was the Celtics game they wore the Atlanta looking jerseys. And I just
Yeah.
don't get it. I love the blue and orange. I think Simple is working really well for them aesthetically. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've never loved their jersey palette, but everything else, like, and I think Shea's going to win the MVP too. I think as the season rolls along, that's just going to become a more and more kind of runaway award for him. I know Jokic is putting up absolutely just incredible numbers, but I think Shea's numbers are going to be, you know, in the similar realm to Jokic's statistical output, and the winning profile of Oklahoma City is just going to be so far ahead of the rest of the West, which is still perceived as the tougher conference. I'm not positive that that's true, but it is still perceived as a tougher conference. And I think another take, which I've had for a little while, which is starting to become more mainstream, is that he is 2020's Kobe Bryant. And if you took, a lot of people wonder what Kobe would look like in the modern game. And I'm talking sort of later stage career Kobe, not freak athlete, explosive early number 8 Kobe, but like later number 24 Kobe. The mid-range artistry, the two-way impact, timely threes, even though he's not like a dead-eye three-point shooter. I think if Kobe was in the modern game, it would look a lot like Shea. And I mean, his coming out party should have been a long time ago, but to casual fans, hopefully these playoffs will be it for them.
Not that late stage Kobe, like before the really chronic injuries at the end, wasn't a really good athlete, but I don't want to sell Shea short as an athlete. His stop start stuff, the change of pace, decel, whatever you want to call it, is extremely special. I think, yeah, Shea's athletic quirks are a huge part of him reaching this ceiling that even the believers didn't really see a few years ago. And I just want to say this, whether the Thunder get their ring this year, next year, a couple of years from now, I want honorary rings for Poku. I want an honorary ring for Micic, Robinson, Earl. Just give them out. There have been a lot of awesome cult hero role guys that have flowed through OKC over the course of this extremely beautiful build. And yeah,
Chris
let's
Paul?
see what they can do. Oh,
Chris
Chris Paul.
Paul?
Well, I'm actually going to mention Chris Paul later. In fact, let me get into that juicy one first. My first thing that I'm ready to say is real right now on January 14th. Victor Wembanyama is a top 5 player in the world. Just turned 21. I think it's safe to say right now that it's Jokic, Shea, Giannis, and Luka at the top. After that group, I don't see a strong argument for anyone over Wemby, who is averaging 25, 11, and 4, 5 stocks. I repeat, 4 blocks and 1 steal, 48, 35, 87 splits. He's minus 250 on Vegas Insider to win Defensive Player of the Year right now. Third in EPM after Shea and Jokic. The Spurs are a 500 team in the loaded West. Their second best player is a 39-year-old guard who claims to be 6 feet tall in shoes. Like, end of conversation.
Yeah.
Who is the Spurs' second best player? I think it's Chris Paul. He's played 32 games. He's been pretty fun. He's averaging 8 assists. Jason Tatum isn't better than Wemby right now. Like, Anthony Edwards is not better than Wemby right now. Give Chris Paul a lot of credit. He's been an awesome point guard for them. And SGA credits CP a lot for the tutelage he provided in 2020. This year, CP is helping Wemby ascend toward his ceiling. But yeah, we went into this year, especially after Paris and LeBron's dominant MVP performance in the Olympics. I know we were flirting with the idea of LeBron still being the 5th best guy when shit hits the fan. LeBron is not the 5th best player in the world anymore. It breaks my heart, but it's a fact. And I think it's Wemby. And I seriously don't see a strong argument for any of the other budding or current superstars around the league.
Yeah. And we haven't potted since Christmas and that performance that he put on against the Knicks on Christmas morning, which was just, I mean, the NBA could not have asked for a better way to start the Christmas slate and try to introduce this guy to introduce this new generation of superstar to their fans. Like, I forget exactly what the stat line was, something like 48, 50, 42, 15, and like several blocks, ridiculous number of deep threes, changed so many shots. And just on a nightly basis, you see how he completely warps the spacing of the court defensively, where guys are just scared to shoot around him. You don't see that from almost anyone else in the NBA, but it's honestly amazing that he averages 4 blocks because it feels like there's another 5+ times a game where guys will come in his vicinity and just change their mind and dribble out or pass out of what otherwise would be a pretty high percentage shot against most other players. And yeah, I can't get over how quickly his offense has translated and evolved because as a prospect, I mean, he was an amazing prospect. I don't think he was like the greatest prospect in the history of sports, as Adrian Wojnarowski said, but he was an amazing prospect. But the defense was way ahead of the offense. The offense was a lot of flashes of like, wow, he can dribble at times. He can make fancy passes and quick reads. He can shoot deep threes
Yeah.
off of like crazy platforms, but it's not like he's a 40% 3-point shooter or like he's doing the ball handling every time. The fact that that stuff has evolved so quickly, the passing, the shooting from different ranges, different platforms, like the rate that he's improving at is insane. And he certainly has an argument already to be number 5. I think he's in a group with a few other guys. Probably like him and Tatum have like the two best arguments for number 5 because Tatum's also taken a bit of a step this year too. But yeah, I think that people basically have to start winning now because the Thunder, the Spurs, like the West is just going to run through those two guys or those two teams for the foreseeable future once they put a real team around him.
Yeah. And I totally respect that people have been saying now, like the West is going to run through OKC for a few years. I think it's an insane testament to how good Wemby is already that my favorite people to listen and read, like Sam Vecini, are literally saying like win now in the West. It's not just OKC. Like Wemby alone is a reason that you should be going for it as soon as possible in the West. Because as much as I love Jeremy Sohan, Steph Castle, Devin Vassell, and the other pieces they have growing around Wemby, like the overall group doesn't even compare in depth of talent to OKC right now. And still just the centerpiece in San Antonio looks like, you know, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar reincarnated in France. And also the fact that he's like playing chess in freezing cold rain in Washington Square Park. Like it just, a legend is unfolding before us.
Yeah.
The one-legged threes, like it isn't just crazy at his size that he's a good 3-point shooter. It's also that like he was below 30% in his last year before the draft. Like you said, the shooting looked good. His stroke was pretty clean, kind of. He looked like one of those very rare Kristaps Porzingis types, like with insane length, but just somehow has a compact, fundamentally smooth shot. But the efficiency, the consistency of his stroke is years ahead of what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, just insanity.
And shout out to Chris Paul
Yeah.
because his on-off differential, if you look at like what their net rating is when he's on the court versus off, it's almost 17 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court compared to off. And he's been an on-off king throughout his career. Like his teams are always way better when he's on the court compared to off. Even last year in Golden State, they were better with him on the court than they were with him off the court by a couple points. So yeah, he's 98th percentile. He's one of the more impactful players in the game still in his late 30s. It's insane to see, but yeah, Vic is coming, and rooting against him on that Christmas Day game was an exhilarating and somewhat terrifying experience.
All right. Give me your Pistons take. Get it over with.
The Pistons are making the play-in, and this was a bold prediction before the season. Now it feels like a cold take because they're the 8th seed. I've been waiting for Philly to get it together and get a few guys healthy where they can like backdoor sneak their way into the 8th seed, but Pistons are not making it easy on them. They just had a big win in the Garden last night. They're 21-19, I believe, 10-2 in their last 12 games. Despite losing Jaden Ivey, they just keep on rolling. Cunningham has had the ball more and more in his hands. At this point, he's close to an all-star lock, and he's showing that he works as the primary offensive engine of a winning team. And this is what we've been waiting to see from him since he entered the league in 2021. And he's had a couple seasons derailed by injury, other seasons derailed by ineptitude and incompetence around him, whether from the front office, coaching, just the way the team was put together. He's averaging 24 points a game, 7 rebounds, 10 assists on 46% overall, 38% from 3, 80% from the free throw line. We've talked in the past just about how strong he is across the board. Every aspect of his game is very well developed and polished. The only things he can improve on really are turnovers and finishing at the rim, which are two things I think he will improve on. And It's not like he's gotten crazy better at anything this year compared to last year. It's just modest improvements across the board. A little better from the 3-point line, a little more space so he can get to his spots better. Slight scoring bump, a meaningful playmaking bump, but that also comes from having more talented guys around him where you're not passing out to guys who are bricking from three. You actually have, Malik Beasley, who's got second in the NBA in 3-pointers made, who he can
Yeah, wait,
kick out
let
to
me
the
jump
corner.
in there because Jaden Ivey led the Pistons last year with 124 made threes. He shot 34%. Malik Beasley's already made 151 threes. We played 30 games. Beasley's shooting 40%. Defensively, he's usually bad, but yeah, in that in itself is massive. And I would push back against the slight improvement for Cade when it comes to 3-point shooting. He's taking twice as many pull-up threes, and he's gone from 32% to 38%. Now, I don't think his 32% last year was an indication that like he was a poor 3-point shooter. He was the grenade launcher for this team and was asked to take a lot of unbelievably hard shots. But he's just much more dynamic as a pull-up shooter this year. And that in itself has drastically changed how teams have to guard him. His gravity is on another level.
Yeah, and I also going back to Malik Beasley, I kind of can't believe that he was only a $6 million a year player in free agency this past year. Like he had a pretty good year in Milwaukee last year, one of the better shooters in the NBA. I feel like everyone still remembers him from his Lakers run, where he was really disappointing when they thought they were getting like a Klay Thompson on their court or something, but he's been so good for them, and they're honestly kind of like a low key deep team. They have Cade, Beasley, Tobias. They've got multiple bigs in Duren and Stewart who can impact the game. I'm probably more of a fan of Stewart than I am of Duren, and Pistons fans would agree with me. They've got guys who can contribute off the bench, and Fontecchio, Marcus Sasser can come in and hit big shots and energy plays. Ron Holland, my guy, has been in their rotation as a rookie, which is honestly a tough bar to clear in the NBA these days, but he's makes energy plays. He's got a knack for going after loose balls, relentless competitor. And yeah, these guys, I'm not sure if they're going to make it into the playoffs or not. It's going to be between them, Atlanta, and maybe Philly if they can get their shit together. I'm not sure, but they're going to be in the play-in. They're going to be making noise. And had I bet before the season, the Pistons were my favorite over for their win over under, which was at 24. They're damn near there already. With 3 more wins and they hit their over. I could have made a lot of money betting on them, but I didn't. So that's life.
It's the price you pay for being a well-adjusted guy. Yeah, I've seen a lot of they put spacing around Cade and look what happens sentiment when it comes to the Pistons. And to your point, I think that just sells short how much of a step Cade has taken. Like he's gone into hostile environments around the country and just been like the man in the arena, maestro. The passing is on another level. The passing in the paint too, not just kickouts, but like finding bigs in really tight spaces. He's awesome. He's absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go with this. The top 5 seeds in the West are the best 5 teams in the West, which isn't usually the case this early in the year. Like I'm ready to say like one seed OKC, 2 seed Houston, 3 seed Memphis, 4 seed Denver, 5 seed Dallas. Might not be the right order in terms of playoff threats, but I think those are the 5 best teams in the West right now. Houston, I had them in the playoffs. They are now 5th in net rating, 11th in offense, 4th in defense, 23rd in strength of schedule, but they're 3-0 against Memphis, 1-0 against full strength Dallas. They beat OKC in December. Houston's been awesome. Sort of like Orlando West, just in terms of how hard they play defensively and they muck games up. And they have the offensive finesse in a pinch with Şengün and Jalen Green when he's the good Jalen Green. Houston hosts Cleveland in a week, so I can't wait to watch Cleveland's offense versus Houston's defense. They're playing Denver for the first time tomorrow, so I'm really interested to see how they match up with Denver because I think right now we know Houston's really good, but we're kind of thinking now about the playoffs, and I'm trying to figure out whether Houston has a chance to be this year's Minnesota, the defensive juggernaut, playoff disruptor. So that Denver game tomorrow will be super interesting. And on Houston, I would just also say shout out Amen Thompson, who now looks like the best athlete in the league, who shows up to team practices and flights on time.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think I'd agree with that sentiment. I do think that the other Western Conference finals spot that is that Oklahoma City is waiting for is pretty wide open. Like I think there's a lot of teams in the West that could make moves at the deadline to put themselves in contention to grab that spot. Um, like even the Lakers, I think, if they make proper moves, could put themselves into contention for that spot because the West is very wide open outside of Oklahoma City. But I would agree. I think I'm not super convinced with the Rockets as a playoff team. I think their offense is going to really grind to a halt to a large degree in similar way that we saw happen with Orlando last year. But there's no doubt that they've positioned themselves to be a top three seed in the West, and I expect it to stay that way. Same with Memphis and Denver. I mean, one of the stories of the season has been Russell Westbrook's resurgence as a Denver Nugget. I don't know if that was another one of your official things or not, but
Yeah, that's part of my list. But I just mentioned Houston because Houston and Memphis specifically are kind of the teams on the block now in the West that weren't around last year. And Memphis being this good isn't a massive shock because they always had the talent. They just needed to stay healthy, and Ja Morant needed to stay out of his own way. It's getting to a point now where like I'm evaluating Houston and Memphis against the proven Denver and Dallas like superstar experience.
yeah,
Because Memphis has been awesome too. Like Memphis is seventh in net rating, ninth in offense, eighth in defense, like top 10 in all three categories is usually a really promising sign. Go on Memphis's ESPN depth chart right now and take a screenshot because there are no red letters next to anyone's name. It's way too good to be true.
yeah,
It feels like Memphis is fully healthy as of mid-January for the first time in a long time. And Jaren Jackson has had an awesome year. He doesn't always really pop statistically because he hovers around 30 minutes per game, but I think he's been one of the 12 or so best players per minute this year. He's a top
yeah.
five defender in the world. His scoring evolved a lot during last year's lost season. And they still have Taylor Jenkins, who experiments with wacky zones. I saw yesterday that Memphis runs pick and roll 7.7% of their possessions, lowest in the league. So they're sort of iconoclastic on both ends. And I just think a perfect example of why basketball isn't as stylistically monotonous as, talking heads who don't watch games want you to believe. Memphis is also the deepest team in the league. They'll probably make a consolidation trade in the next month.
Yeah.
So I picked them to be the 2 seed in the West. So I'm obviously going to brag about this one. And I'm open to the argument that they're as dangerous as anyone after OKC. Houston, less so. I agree with you there. The offense is still a massive question mark. That's kind of why I compare them to Orlando. Like, I still am not convinced that when push comes to shove in the playoffs, Houston will generate efficient enough looks. Memphis might be able to do that. They just, their offensive talent is sort of a tier above Houston's. And after what Minnesota did to Denver last year, I just don't want to get stuck in the mindset of like choosing the old guard. I want to be
Yeah.
open minded to these really, really productive regular season teams.
Very fair. I think if they can get healthy, Dallas is still clearly the second best team in the West to me. I mean, it's a lot of it is shown by the fact that even when they haven't been healthy, they've still been able to stay afloat as a top five seed. But with the
Yeah.
talent they added this summer between Clay, Najee Marshall, Quentin Grimes, the steps some of their young guys have taken, I just think they're super deep. They've got Dinwiddie playing like it's 2022 again after he was horrible for the Lakers last year.
Yeah. Unreal.
And yeah, so I think I'd still pick them to be my second best team in the West if they can get Luka and Kyrie back in one piece. But yeah, no one's gonna want to play Houston or Memphis either.
On the Denver front, yeah, you mentioned Russ. In their last 10 games, Russ is averaging 16, 8, and 8, shooting 54% from the field, a steal and a half. He's been really, really bad when he's not on the court with Jokic. So that makes me think Russ is either going to play a lot or very little in the playoffs. But he's a big reason why Denver has righted the ship in their last 17 games or so. And because of Russ's massive fall off in the minutes Jokic isn't on the court with him, I still expect the Denver Russ experience to go haywire long term. I'm just going to be stubborn on that take. But the Nuggets had a straight up depth crisis at the start of the season, and Russ has brought a ton of heart and production. So I just got to admit I was wrong. Wherever this goes, like they're 23 and 15 now, and it looked like it could take a turn for the worst.
Yeah, and they still have some closing issues with him where like
Yeah.
they want to run the offense through Murray and Jokic in the clutch, but then you have you have Russ and Aaron Gordon there, and neither of them are really being guarded as shooters, and both are trying to cut. So that is a little bit redundant, and he was really huge, especially in the time that Aaron Gordon missed, and sort of recreating some of that production around the rim and things of that nature, helping with rebounding. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's gone way better than anyone could have possibly imagined, except Jokic, who pushed for the move allegedly. So, and what better argument is there for Jokic's status as an all-time great offensive player than his ability to fit around Russell Westbrook, who's maybe the hardest to fit around star that we've had in the last 10 or 15 years. So, that sounds like an extremely backhanded compliment to Russ, but
It's just true though. I
it's
mean,
true.
anyone who watched the Lakers Russ debacle can't be too mad at that.
Yeah,
Also, shout out Christian Brown and Peyton Watson. Overall, the Denver situation doesn't feel dire like it did early on.
for sure.
They still have depth issues. It still isn't, the team that Jokic deserves. Although I keep saying that, and then I regret saying it because I'm like, these guys are making hundreds of millions of dollars, and like, Jokic has a ring, Giannis has a ring. It isn't a disaster that they don't have the supporting cast we wish they had. But just as a fan, like obviously, I want to see Jokic keep in the playoffs.
Yeah. Well, speaking of dire situations, the Phoenix Suns are the most screwed team in the NBA. They are now bringing their $50 million man Bradley Beal with a no trade clause off the bench. Just a refresher on his contract: he's making 50 million this year, then 53 million the year after that. And then he has a player option for 57 million, which, to channel Ryan Russillo, I think he's picking that up. You can't trade him. You can't acquire anything else of value because all of their money is tied up in the big three. So if you can't trade Beal because of his no trade clause, then to get anything else really of value, you have to trade either Booker or Durant, which they've expressed no interest in doing. And with a trio like that, your formula is elite on offense and just good enough on defense. Well, they're 10th on offense, which is not good enough. And it's certainly not good enough to make up for their 22nd ranked defense. And I just don't see which way they go. Like, do they trade some of their fringe vets for like late first round picks, like Royce O'Neal or something like that, for a late first round pick to try to restock through the draft and just sort of free up some more flexibility? I don't see them trading Kevin Durant. I don't see them trading Bradley Beal. Like, this team went completely all in on this iteration of the team, trading almost all their first round picks and assets for Kevin Durant, who's been really good as a Sun, but they just have no other pieces around him and Devin Booker. And the two of them are not, or Kevin Durant's not at a stage in his career where he can elevate a team as a true number one option in the way that he was earlier in his career. And the rest of the NBA is just deeper, where you can't just get by with two really good players and expect the rest of your team to just be subpar and have a real playoff run. Like, they're going to be lucky to make the playoffs at this point. I don't even know if they're in the play in as we speak right now. And I just don't see which way they go. There's this Jimmy Butler noise, but Bradley Beal clearly doesn't want to waive his no trade clause. So they can't trade for Jimmy Butler without trading out Bradley Beal. So I just don't see how they get out of this. And they're so screwed. And I don't feel like it's talked about enough.
I feel for Yusuf Nurkic. All Blazers fans feel for Yusuf Nurkic. I forget what year it was. I think it was 2017 that he broke his leg against the Timberwolves when he was playing the best basketball of his life. And he came back a couple years later in the bubble, really looked like himself and played at almost like a Marcus Saul kind of magical, graceful, big polar bear type of level. But it's just really, really struggled to find himself ever since. And it's culminated in his unfollowing of KD and Devin Booker on Instagram,
Oh, I didn't see that.
and he's benched. He's made a lot of money playing basketball, but I think the history books won't teach our kids that Yusuf Nurkic was as talented as he was and like had a chance to be a really, really good big man. He used to be really good on defense. He doesn't really move anymore. Then he had that emotional flare up. I don't know what to call it with Najee Marshall. The Suns are a home on fire, and it's crazy. I think they have and to your point, they still have a couple guys who are probably really, really good number twos on a contender, but they don't have the floor raiser to overcome all of the roster deficiencies.
Yeah, and I mentioned trading for Jimmy Butler. I think the Jimmy Butler story is largely pretty dumb. I don't think he's going anywhere. That was kind of another one of my things. I
Yeah,
did it. I looked around the landscape of the league to see like what teams even could trade for Jimmy Butler and then which of them made any sense. And I could came up with like five that I could sort of squint and see if they made sense. Like, but I don't know why either team would really be that excited for it. There's a very funny one if he could go to Philadelphia and swap for Paul George, which would just be kind of peak guys who get traded all the time. I don't know why Miami would want to do that though. He can go to Houston for some combination of Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, and Reed Shepard. I'm not sure if Houston would want to give up on Reed Shepard that soon. I'm also not sure if they want to mess with the sort of chemistry of their young guys that they have right now. The timelines are very different for Jimmy Butler versus their younger guys. But if there's a coach who wants to get like a psycho in the door, I could see Ime Udoka being that guy. But
totally.
that's a real possibility.
But like, what's in it for Miami? Miami has never been a team that trades a really good player for picks. Not
Exactly.
that, not that Jimmy Butler at his age still commands a crazy package of picks, but it just doesn't feel like a Pat Riley move to trade to Houston, knowing that Houston's not going to give up any of the young pieces that Miami would ask for.
Yeah. Maybe a Miami move would be trading him to Sacramento for DeMar DeRozan, Kevin Huerter, and Trey Lyles. Like, sure, but that would just be you got to take the keys from Pat Riley at that point if he makes that deal.
Yeah. Just a reminder that Jimmy Butler's been really good this year. Like he's
Yeah,
maybe a couple percentage points below his production the last few years, but when healthy, mentally and physically, Jimmy Butler, and even when mentally unhealthy this year, he's showed up and played some really good regular season games. It was kind of like that last game or two before the interview, the post game interview and the suspension, that he looked like he was dogging it a little bit on the court. But before that, like this was a recognizable, aging but still recognizable, defensively really important Jimmy Butler, and he could really help a team if there's some way you could get him somewhere. And the Heat are still in the playoff picture, and like the
yeah.
Heat, Tyler Harrow's having an amazing year. Like that was one of the things I was going to point out. This year is just that the bar to be a great player in 2025 is so insanely high. Not that that's such a novel take, but it's been smacking me in the face recently. Like Nikola Vucevic is so good. Emmanuel Quickley is so good, even though he hasn't been healthy this year. And you can argue none of these guys is even a third best guy on a champion. I think that's a really easy argument, actually. Tyler Harrow's amazing. The Heat are not terrible, and Jaime Jaquez has been coming on a little bit since Jimmy left, but like, like if there's any way they could repair the relationship, which seems to be way beyond repair, like this could still be, a 7 or 8 seed that nobody at the top wants to get in round one.
I mean, they have the same number of losses as the Magic, who are in the 4 seed. Like, they're
Yeah.
really not that far out of it. The only other trades I can come up with, Milwaukee. Again, if they want like a Middleton Portis, but like, why would they want that? And then Atlanta was actually the most interesting one. If they wanted to do like Capella, DeAndre Hunter, Kobe Buffkin, and a first. But as you said, Miami's not a team that trades their stars for young guys and draft picks. So all that is to say, I went through every team in the NBA and it just doesn't really make sense for any of them to trade for Jimmy Butler. Like the Knicks aren't giving up their starters to trade for Jimmy Butler. Orlando's not messing with their chemistry. The Warriors would have to do like a 5-for-1 trade to avoid giving up Andrew Wiggins. And if they give up Wiggins for Butler, they're still not going to be a championship level team or even a second round level team. So
Yeah.
it's I'm a little annoyed that it's getting as much airtime as it is because I feel like it's
Yeah.
not going to amount to anything and it's just posturing.
It seems like it's fake news. I've even messed around with like 3-team trades and it's hard to figure it out. Like even if a team like the Nets was able to use like the Ben Simmons contract to get up to Jimmy Butler's number, even if the Nets were willing to like take Jimmy Butler for a few games and then trade him, knowing Brooklyn's current strategy, which is tank the shit out of their season. Like I doubt they'd even want Jimmy Butler to touch the floor for them. So they wouldn't really do it unless they knew they had a destination for him. But yeah, and it's weird because Jimmy Butler is one of my favorite players of this era. And it's the first time that I feel like the public and like the people who are best at talking about the game are kind of over it.
Yeah.
When he played with the third string Timberwolves and yelled at the coach and GM that he was too good for them and embarrassed Cat and Andrew Wiggins, like the world was kind of on his side because we
Yeah.
thought of those guys as kind of soft and underperformers, and Jimmy's awesome. And it's just hard to argue now that if it's as simple as Pat Riley didn't give him the extension he thought he deserved, I don't know. This is where you get to that really interesting sweet spot of like player empowerment, the artist's right to like ask for more
Yeah.
versus like Pat Riley, old school guy saying, I pay my guys a lot and he kind of owes me. And sorry, he's in his mid 30s and has, a long injury history. And I didn't want to give him another couple of years of 50 plus.
Yeah. All right. I've got like one more big-ish one, so give me one of yours.
Okay. This is actually my last one I had down,
Okay.
other than the Raptors being the best 8-31 team I've ever seen. Um, barring significant injuries, Boston or Cleveland is winning the East. I'm booking it. I'm sorry. I know, but you're not that delusional, a Knicks fan. The Knicks are really good. I think they're firmly in the tier right below the Celtics and Cavs, but they've pretty much locked themselves into this current core. And I just really highly doubt that Mitchell Robinson or whatever they can get in a role player trade is making the difference for New York.
Yeah.
So my more petty take is just I'm really sick of Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart and the way they behave. Doing my Rusilla like Jalen Brunson is the Pam Beasley of the NBA right now. But Knicks fans are really lucky Warriors fans exist at this moment for me. And so, yeah, I'm pretty positive at this point the Knicks aren't going to break in, aren't going to ruin the plans of those top two teams in the East. Orlando, even with this year's Franz healthy, I don't think is near the same class offensively as Boston or Cleveland. They're like in the mid late 20s in offense this year. Granted, they haven't had Paolo and Franz on the court together, but Orlando's really good. Everyone's rooting for Orlando because they play so damn hard. But Orlando's going to need time to grow, like every super talented young core does. If you're still telling yourself that Milwaukee is a sleeping giant that just needs to figure out how to be healthy for round one of the playoffs, I don't know what to tell you. I think you're living in the wrong year. It's just too much to ask of Giannis. And I'm done talking about how Giannis deserves better, as I mentioned. Like Giannis, everyone wants to see Giannis in the conference finals. And it sucks for the league that Giannis's sidekicks have gotten a bit too old, but he has a ring and he's already made $300 million and he just turned 30. I just think the cup finals were the exception and not the rule with this version of Milwaukee. Pacers really coming on after a rough start to the year. They've already got a sneaky, impressive resume. They're top 5 in offense, top 10 in net rating, top 10 strength of schedule. They host the Cavs tonight. I haven't seen what's happened in that second half. I watched the first half. It was pretty close, but they did end the Cavs 12-game win streak on Sunday. So Halliburton and the Pacers are back to looking like a speedy, nonstop nightmare of an offense to try to contain. They've won 6 in a row, but it's only been a few weeks, and they're going to have to maintain this level for a couple of months before I take their potential path to the conference finals even remotely seriously. And then on Boston, I thought I would just add really quickly that, Boston's 9-6 since December 7th, which is kind of the slump people have been talking about. I think it's still the Celtics. There's a little bit of a championship hangover. They still have the best net rating in the East. Shockingly, they have a better net rating than Cleveland. And for me, they're just easily in tier 1 in the East and should, in my opinion, still be the betting favorite.
Are you looking
in the East? I haven't really done a deep dive on Boston versus OKC in the last few weeks, but in the East, I would still want in my casino, I'd want Boston to be the number 1 betting favorite. And those are kind of the players in the East. And it goes back to my initial thesis, just that, barring some really serious injuries to a core player on one of these teams like Boston or Cleveland is making it to the finals. I just think they're in a class of their own.
Yeah, I think it's very clear the 3 best teams in the league are OKC, Cleveland, and Boston. And the net ratings back that up. They're like the 3 teams that are Boston's slightly under 10 on NBA.com at least, but they're all around 10 or better, which is typically the mark of like a dominant team. Those are the 3 dominant teams. And that's similar to my thing, which is that I think the East playoffs are going to be better than the West playoffs this year. And that has not been the case in a very long time. But I think two of the best three teams in the NBA are in the East, in Cleveland and Boston. Maybe three of the best four, although I would have been very firm on that a couple weeks ago with New York being the fourth team. After the last couple weeks, I'm much more wobbly on that being the case. But you mentioned it with some of the how some of the other teams in the East are starting to figure it out. Indy recent win over Cleveland, also a recent win over Boston, and the big difference for Indy has been Andrew Nemhard coming back. They're 17-8 with Nemhard, 5-10 without, which is the difference between like a 3 seed winning pace and a 12 seed winning pace. And Halliburton's starting to get his shooting back together, his burst, and the team's fourth in offense in the last 15 games. So the Pacers can throw a punch in the playoffs that teams can be very unprepared for, as we saw last year with them making their run to the conference finals. So I think the East is like six deep with teams that can really pose real matchup problems in the playoffs between the top three teams and then Orlando, Indiana, and Milwaukee, who can all cause real matchup problems in different ways. So I'd like we could see a first round where you have something like Cavs versus whoever comes out of the play-in, if it's the Sixers or the Pistons or the Hawks. Celtics Heat again, hopefully healthy this time. Knicks Pacers again, hopefully healthy this time. Bucks Magic. Like there's a lot, I think, of very quality teams in the East and very interesting matchups between teams in terms of great offense, great defense, high pace, low pace, young, old, that can make those playoff series really interesting. And I just think, yeah, the East has got a ton of talent. And while it's been kind of just a walkover for the Celtics the past couple of years and hasn't always had the most entertaining playoffs, even going back to the times of LeBron just running through the conference, I think this is the year we get a real elite Eastern Conference playoff picture.
I've got nothing except an update that the Ole Miss Rebels just went into Tuscaloosa and won, which is as quadrant one a win as you're going to get. And then
Oh,
Cleveland in Indiana, after Indiana ends their 12-game winning streak in Cleveland, Cleveland goes to Indiana for the second of a back-to-back, and not an actual back-to-back because it was a couple days later, but Cleveland's going to win this one. They're up 12 with a minute and a half left. And it's just crazy how used to I am now Cleveland just like winning games, just beating good teams and
yeah.
kind of running away with second halves. And Darius Garland is on another level. I don't think there's a tighter handle since Kyrie than Darius Garland.
Hmm.
Donovan Mitchell's defense, he's not a sieve like he was, the last couple of years. Evan Mobley's playing on a completely different level. Like we should probably just talk about this team all the time because it is one of the stories of the season
Yeah.
and validating for us Cleveland believers. It was a couple of years of real Cleveland disappointment. And yeah, Kenny Atkinson came in and just drastically reshaped the energetic field of this Cleveland universe.
Yeah. And also you mentioned Memphis as the deepest team in the NBA or maybe the deepest team in the NBA. Cleveland's got the argument for second or first, perhaps. Like they're 12 or 13 deep and guys who are real quality NBA rotation players. Our guy Jalen Tyson can't even get on the court for them, sadly, as a rookie. But yeah, they've answered all my questions. Their win against OKC the other night was so impressive.
They really looked apart. And this is why I can't wait to watch Cleveland in the playoffs because we talk so much. And I feel like we talk about it a little bit less these days, but I feel like for so many years of my NBA fandom, we wouldn't shut up about the regular season versus playoffs differences, in part because it just didn't matter what seed LeBron was. If LeBron was healthy for the playoffs, which he always was, and he was the 4 seed, he was going to, it didn't matter if he had home court advantage in the conference finals in the East, like he was going to figure it out. Now I'm like, okay, let's see what a team like Cleveland that disappointed last year, that is, I think in the second apron, they're definitely at least in the first, and is now living up to all of the hype and so much more. Let's see if they look like this in the playoffs. Like, let's see if they're ready. Let's see if 31-4, 32-4, whatever they are now. Let's see if it translates
Yeah.
because I want to believe that the dominance they've displayed matters. And maybe they are better than Boston. Just like I said in the West, I don't want to fall back on, I'm taking Jokic, I'm taking Luka. Like, maybe the second half of this season, the next 50 games will tell us a lot about Memphis. And maybe I'm going to have to be a man and pick Memphis to beat one of these all-time greats. Offensively, OKC is not at this level right now.
Yeah. and both teams have a good chance of winning 70 games, which is pretty crazy.
All right, this has been the Borserk Podcast. We will be back soon. Thank you so much if you made it here, and we love you. Bye.
Borserk.